Watchmen. This is one of the greatest graphic novels ever written. I've been meaning to read this book for so long. Very, very long time. Watchmen is such an interesting story that I can't even do it justice. Honestly, you need to read this for yourself. I have heard nothing but praise and allotted, just uh, a lot of praise and criticism for this book for years, and I sat down to read it, and even I, reading it, said none of that stuff did it justice. There's hails of it being one of the greatest graphic novels ever written, best thing ever made by Alan Moore, whatever it is, whatever piece of praise or accolades or awards, whatever this book has had with it, it does not do it justice to what it actually is. There are so many misconceptions about what this book is, and there's also so many ways to describe it. But the reason I'm reviewing this comic is because I tend to review this and Zack Snyder's film. I'm debating on doing the HBO series. I might wait to do that to when part 2 comes out. Essentially, if you don't know, at the end of this month, or I believe it arrives on digital. I'm waiting for the physical media release. We are getting a new Watchmen animated film that is basically going to be the definitive film-to-screen version of Watchmen. Essentially, it is going to be a 1-to-1 translation of that graphic novel, part 1 and part 2. So I imagine each part is an hour and a half. You put them together, you get a 3-hour film, right? DC's done this a few with their animated movies. But Watchmen's something very different, right? So I have been very excited about this film, and I wanted to actually read Watchmen for the first time, then go through Zack Snyder's film with the context of the actual graphic novel and kind of compare and contrast. Then we'll talk about that movie, right? I think Watchmen is really fascinating. It is a very well-written book, and it's a very cynical book. Alan Moore is not a writer that you go to for any type of real joy or like any positive feelings. Not to say there's none of that in here. There's sweet moments between characters. There's moments that I would say are comedic, like certain lines of dialogues. There's a moment where certain characters are reminiscent moments about characters. There's moments with characters reminiscing about the past and other things like that within this book, right? There's good moments between these characters, but this book is very cynical. It is very much about the politics of the time that this book was written. And you can look into all that history yourself. I'm not going to talk about that here. But you see a lot of that echoes throughout the pages and how a lot of it is still relevant today. And our current politics are kind of weaved within the pages. And also, it is just an expertly done deconstruction of the superhero or comic book genre and how our government, it's basically what if superheroes were real, right? Because let's not kid ourselves. Government would have higher protections to protect itself against people like Superman and Batman and certain vigilantes and other things, and the public would also not always view them as heroes, and you see that in regular superhero media as well, right? There's moments where certain heroes are put into doubt, but most of the time the heroes are still the good guys. They still save the day. People eventually come around back to them. There's moments in Superman stories where Superman, maybe doesn't always look like the good guy, but eventually people come around and he's the savior. He saves the day, right? Watchmen isn't like that. In fact, most of the heroes in this book are gone, or they're on their way out, or like in the case of Dr. Manhattan, they're a fucking sociopath that works with the government. And so there's a lot of interesting ideas here that are explored throughout that. It's also got a great art to it with like a very realistic tone and vibe, but it's also got great framing and everything where you read it and you just see like expert shots of cinematography. I'm trying not to show you so much because I also don't want to spoil the book. It's also just got great dialogue. A lot of the dialogue is very poignant. It sticks with you. It's a very wordy comic, you know. A lot of the comics that you read now aren't very wordy, and even some of the ones back when this was printed were not as wordy as this. And it's just a very complete story, and it's very well done. And it's kind of strange because, you know, ever since this book came out, there's been like this demand from people and DC who published it. They want more Watchmen. But Watchmen isn't made to have more. It isn't made to be a franchise. It isn't made to be a big DC thing. And it's kind of been thrown into that. You see, you know, Dr. Manhattan, and now like advertising images was like Superman and Batman and other Marvel and DC characters. And that's so silly. You shouldn't ever see that, you know? Dr. Manhattan's a pretty fucked up individual who's naked most of the time in these books as well, too. And so, I don't know. It's a very interesting dynamic that they play with Watchmen and kind of all that stuff. I love Watchmen, and I can safely say that after reading all this. It is so well written, so well crafted. It's also got a great noirish take at the very beginning, with Rorschach kind of investigating the death of the comedian, so much other stuff within Watchmen. I love this book. Highly recommend it. And what's great is you can get multiple versions of it. Watchmen is very unique. From what I understand, Alan Moore signed a deal with DC that if they were ever to take Watchmen and put it out of print, essentially all the rights to Watchmen were returned to him. And to DC's credit, they never took Watchmen out of print, which surprised him. He thought he would have the rights back to Watchmen by now. And instead, they've capitalized on it. So that means that Watchmen's a very easy book to get your hands on. This version, I bought at Target for $10. You can buy this in Target for $10. And you go on Amazon and order it for $10. There's bigger versions. There's hardcover editions. I went with this one just because this is if you can see here, this is a very chunky book. Like, there's a lot in here. It did not take me just a day to read. It took me days to read this, which most comics that I read don't take me that long, even trade paperbacks and omnibuses sometimes, because of how wordy it is, how much certain things made me uncomfortable in the book, and I had to stop and go back, continue. It is, you know, but I went with this version because it's so chunky that this is the easiest version to take on the go and open back up and read and things like that. There's other versions that are probably better for collecting reasons or better for durability, but in terms of like practicality of actually reading and, you know, taking it on the go, this is the easiest version. This is not the only version of this book I have, but this is the best version to have with those factors that I mentioned. But yeah, Watchmen, what an incredible read. Let me know your thoughts.